of the University of Minnesota. And this evening, on behalf of the Tucker Center for Research on Girls and Women in Sports, which, as we know, is housed very substantially and well in our College of Education and Human Development with our dean here this evening, it's my pleasure to welcome all of you to this Fall Distinguished Lecture. Thank you all for coming. World-class research centers, such as the Tucker Center, are absolutely essential for our university's ability to promote the public good, particularly as we advance this as one of the great public research universities of the world. Centers like this help drive the latest research that is shared with our students, in our community, and more broadly in society. Centers are bigger than a single faculty member, smaller than a college to be sure, and so often it creates a structure that permits a nimbleness that crosses so many important interdisciplinary structures and boundaries at our university. Research centers are a very important core, like the Tucker Center we celebrate tonight, a very important core of the identity of this university. And as you're going to see tonight, the Tucker Center, like many of our other research centers at the university, the Tucker Center is making an enormous difference in the lives of people. Many of you know that the Tucker Center has three principal goals: to conduct research on impact of sport in the lives of girls and women; second, to provide first-rate educational opportunities for our students; and third, to engage the community in outreach and public understanding. This distinguished lecture series brings all of these parts together and is a centerpiece of the mission of the University of Minnesota. I think this center demonstrates the best and the brightest that this university has to offer. And tonight's panel will exemplify that very statement. It's my pleasure at this time to introduce to you, before we introduce the panel and before we introduce some of our very distinguished guests with us, the director of the Tucker Center, who really needs no introduction among this crowd, I think, Professor Mary Jo Kane. And I think it's clear that we can say today that this center would not be here, and it certainly would not be here with all of the strengths and the productivity of the center, without the dynamic leadership, the vision of Mary Jo Kane. We know her formally as a full professor, department chair, and the first and only director of the Tucker Center. Mary Jo received her PhD at the University of Illinois with emphasis on sports sociology. She is an internationally renowned teacher and scholar who has published extensively on the media's stereotypical treatment of female athletes. In 1996, Professor Kane was awarded a distinguished professorship relating to women in sport. And importantly, she was elected by her peers to the relevant National Academy, the highest academic office and honor that any faculty member can obtain. In 2004, she received the Scholar of the Year award from the Women's Sports Foundation. You know, it just doesn't get any better than having your peers recognize your talents. In 2007, Professor Kane was named one of the 100 most influential sports educators by one of the most prestigious journals. To those of us at the University of Minnesota who know Mary Jo well, all of these awards are no surprise, because she is simply the best of the best at this university. It's a great pleasure to introduce Professor Mary Jo Kane.
Thank you, Provost Sullivan. Before I begin my opening remarks, I want to thank you all for coming to tonight's event And I also want to let you know that there will be a reception right after the panel and what I'm sure is going to be a thought-provoking question and answer session. But as Provost Sullivan mentioned, I do want to acknowledge some of our distinguished guests in the audience who have been key supporters of the Tucker Center over the years, and that includes Provost Sullivan himself. So I'd like you to hold your applause until I get through. The Dean of the College of Education and Human Development, Jean Quam, who is in the back. From the President's Office, Patty Franklin. I saw you somewhere, Patty, right there. Dave Metzen, who is the former chair of the Board of Regents of the University of Minnesota and currently serves as the Commissioner of Higher Education for the state of Minnesota, in the back. Phil Eston, CEO of the University of Minnesota Alumni Association and one of my former PhD students, I might add. So see, folks, there is life, for my other graduate students, there is life after graduate school. Joel Maturi, athletic director from the Department of Intercollegiate Athletics, is right here. And Mark Baumgartner, who comes from the University of Minnesota Foundation. The reason that I like to acknowledge folks is because centers like ours could not survive and thrive without broad and deep support across the university, and we certainly have that. Finally, there is one other person who long supported the Tucker Center, and I often would look up in the audience and see her smiling face. Many of you know that Jean Freeman passed away last Thursday, so she will not be attending any more Tucker Center events. So I would like to take just a second to a moment of silence to honor Jean and the legacy that she has left behind for all of us. Thank you. Finally, I'd like to acknowledge members of the Tucker team for all the hard work they have done behind the scenes: Austin Calhoun, Alyssa Norris, Jonathan Sweet. And a special thanks goes out to Associate Director Dr. Nicole Lavoie, who has overseen the entire event, which is no small task. So how about a round of applause for all those folks? Over the past 3 decades, rates of obesity have dramatically and alarmingly increased in adults and children, with the highest increases occurring among minority females. Negative consequences stemming from being dangerously overweight, diabetes, high blood pressure and cholesterol, and some cancers, to name a few, are clearly a significant public health concern. And these negative health outcomes are especially problematic for minority females. One measure of this nationwide trend: nearly half of African American and Latina girls aged 12 to 19 are significantly overweight or obese, compared to less than 30% of young white females. Closer to home, a recently released study commissioned by the Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Minnesota Foundation, entitled "The Unequal Distribution of Health in the Twin Cities," indicated that one's physical health is significantly influenced by factors such as educational background, income, and racial makeup. The authors of this study found that people of color in the Twin Cities scored much lower on a number of physical health factors such as mortality, diabetes, and obesity. In Hennepin County alone, almost 40% of African Americans are considered obese, and 12% have diabetes. These figures are much higher when compared to their white counterparts, whose rates are 19% and 5%, respectively. So the critical question for us as scholars, as educators, as parents, and policymakers becomes: what can be done to reduce these alarming trends in statistics? And what role does involvement in sport and physical activity play with respect to prevention and intervention strategies? Fortunately for us, the University of Minnesota has 3 of the finest scholars in the country who have empirically addressed precisely these questions. And it is my honor tonight to introduce them to you. So I'm going to ask the panelists now to come up and sit in their respective chairs, and then I'll introduce each one of them individually. Our first panelist, and the individual who is sitting closest to me, is Beth Lewis, Assistant Professor in the School of Kinesiology and Adjunct Assistant Professor of Psychiatry and Human Behavior at Brown University Medical School. She is also a licensed psychologist. Professor Lewis received her PhD in clinical psychology and completed her postdoctoral training in behavioral interventions for exercise. Her groundbreaking research focuses on how to motivate sedentary adults, especially women, to become more physically active. Professor Lewis has authored several articles in top-tier academic journals and serves as the principal investigator on grants funded by the National Institutes of Health. Currently, she serves as the principal investigator on a nationwide study examining the effect of exercise on preventing postpartum depression. Professor Beth Lewis. Our second panelist, who is sitting just to Beth Lewis's right, is Dahia Bar-Anderson, also an assistant professor in the School of Kinesiology. She received her PhD in exercise physiology and epidemiology from the University of Maryland in 2006. Before joining our faculty, Professor Bar-Anderson held a postdoc funded by the CDC in the University of Minnesota School of Public Health. Her research examines physical activity, sedentary behaviors, and obesity prevention in children and adolescents, particularly interventions that incorporate physical activity and nutrition to decrease racial health inequalities. Professor Bar-Anderson has received grants from General Mills and the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation for her innovative research on environmental influences of physical activity and obesity among adolescent girls. This fall, she was named a Birch Scholar, and I look at Provost Sullivan, I know you know of the Birch program. This prestigious national award, funded by the NIH, supports the career development of junior faculty members who have demonstrated outstanding research capabilities. Dahia Bar-Anderson. Our third distinguished panelist is Diane Newmark-Stainer, professor in the Division of Epidemiology and Community Health in the School of Public Health, and adjunct professor in the Department of Pediatrics. Professor Newmark-Stainer received her PhD in Behavioral Sciences and Nutrition from Hebrew University. Her award-winning research focuses on adolescent nutrition and the prevention of weight-related problems, including eating disorders, body dissatisfaction, and obesity. She has published over 250 articles. I can't even imagine that you're still alive to do that. She's published over 250 articles in peer-reviewed scientific journals and has served as the principal investigator on several federally funded grants. Professor Newmark-Stainer has received numerous honors for her innovative work, including prestigious awards from the National Eating Disorders Association, the International Academy for Eating Disorders, and the Eating Disorders Coalition. So please join me now, folks, in giving a very warm Minnesota welcome to our three distinguished panelists. Take it away.
Okay. Thank you for that very nice introduction. It really is an honor to be here. What I'm going to talk about first is I'm going to provide an overview of obesity in general and the role that exercise plays in preventing obesity. So I'll talk a little bit about rates and how obesity is defined, and then finish up with more of what we can do to become more active. So I'm going to talk more broadly, and Dr. Bar-Anderson and Dr. Newmark-Stainer will talk a little bit more specifically about obesity in race and ethnic minorities. So first off, I thought it would be helpful to actually define obesity for you. I know many of you have heard of the term obesity and know what I'm talking about, but a lot of times people don't realize how it's technically defined. And it's based on body mass index, which is a measure of an adult's weight in relation to his or her height. So it's weight in kilograms divided by the square root of his or her height in meters. There's actually, if that sounds too complicated to figure out, I'll give you a web link to plug in the numbers if you want to know that in the next slide. So obesity is a BMI of greater than or equal to 30, and overweight is a BMI between 25 and 29.9. So just to give you an example of what That might be for somebody who's 5'3". So if you were 142 pounds or more, you would be considered overweight. If you were 170 pounds or more, you would be considered obese. And the definition so that was for adults, but for children, it's a little different. It's based on percentiles. And a healthy weight is considered between the 5th percentile or less than 85th percentile for BMI. And overweight is from 85th percentile to less than 95th percentile. And obese is equal to or greater than 95th percentile. So again, here's the link to if you actually were interested in plugging in your BMI to see where you were sitting at. You could just go directly to cdc.gov and in the search term put in BMI, and you'd be able to get this calculator. So it is based, both children and adults are based on the BMI level, and this calculator will be able to calculate BMI. I know there are researchers in the room, I'm sure you've seen these slides before. Many of you maybe have not, so I thought I wanted to talk a little bit about the obesity rates in the last 20 years and how they've increased. So in 1990, this is what the United States looked like in terms of the obesity rates across the United States. There were a handful of states that were between 10 to 14% in terms of obesity rates. You can see Minnesota here was one of the lower ones. Then in 1995, they added a new category, which was between 15 to 19%. So again, you see more states are becoming more obese 5 years later in 1995. In 2000, they had to add another category, which was greater than 20%. You can see Minnesota is still holding out there in the 15 to 19% range. And then in 2005, it all goes downhill. Again, I'm missing some years in between here, but in 2005, you can see the categories are even more, with adding even a 25 to 29% and a 30% range. So by 2005, then Minnesota was up to 20 to 24%, and they even had to add a new color there with the greater than 30%. To see where we're sitting now in 2009, it hasn't gotten any better, it's worse. If you think back to the 1990 slide, there were no states that were above 15% in terms of their rate of obesity. And now in 2009, we have 33 states that have an obesity rate of higher than 25%. The only ones that are under 20% are Colorado and Washington, D.C. So the rates of obesity have increased substantially in the last 20 years among adults. To break this down by gender, overall, in terms of obesity, if you look at the averages across the entire United States, and this is based on data that just came out this year in 2010 in the Journal of the American Medical Association, 34% of adults are obese. And it's slightly more in women than men. So 36% of women and 32% of men. 68% of adults are obese or overweight. So again, meeting that criteria of being 25 or higher. So nearly over 2/3 of Americans either are in the obese or overweight category. And this is kind of the opposite in terms of 72% of men versus 64% of women. So this is a substantial amount. The obesity rates in children by gender, about 17% of children are obese, 16% of girls, 18% of boys, and alarmingly, 32% of children, so a third of our children are either overweight or obese. And it's about close to even for both girls and boys. And Dr. Barr Anderson is going to talk specifically about race and ethnicity and how that varies by race. So now that we know the staggering numbers and how it's increased over the past 20 years, I want to talk a little bit more about the depressing details. I promise I'll get happier during the second half of my talk. We'll talk about what we can do. But for now, I'm going to be downer for a little bit longer. The health consequences of obesity, we know, like Dr. Kane said, we know there are many, many risks of being obese. The biggest one that you find is type 2 diabetes. The other ones are coronary heart disease, high blood pressure, gallbladder problem, disease, stroke, sleep apnea, where you stop breathing when you're sleeping, respiratory problems, arthritis, some types of cancer. Specifically related to women, there's been some studies that have been done with thousands of women that have shown the rates are very much dependent upon how high somebody's BMI is. So somebody in the overweight category, or 25, has a risk of diabetes 5 times that of somebody of normal weight. BMI of 30 is 28 times the risk, and a BMI of 35 is 93 times the risk. And as you can see, the coronary heart disease for women, this is based on the Women's Health Study with 38,000 women. You can see that it varies depending on if you're overweight and active. But for people who are obese and inactive, the increased risk is 253% compared to a normal active person. We also know that obesity is linked to increased risk of breast cancer, and obese girls are more likely to become obese adults. So that's one of the biggest risk factors in terms of obesity and overweight in kids, is that can translate into adulthood. Okay, so last downer slide. The cost of obesity is annual medical costs associated with obesity are approximately $147 billion each year in the United States. And on average, individuals who are obese have medical costs that are $1,429 more than normal weight individuals. Okay, so this is the question that I get often when I tell people that I'm a physical activity researcher. The first thing they say is, oh, you can help me. How do I exercise more? I want to lose weight. And the first thing I always say to people is, well, it's not really about losing weight per se. That can be a side effect, but it's really about how you feel after you exercise, helping your body work better, helping you sleep better, decrease your stress. And so I try to focus on that. But again, they'll say, yeah, that's great. But how do I lose weight? And so what I want to talk about a little bit is, does exercise help with preventing obesity? And the first thing I want to do is I will talk to you about a couple of studies that have been done. But I do want to set the record straight on a couple of media reports that have come out recently in the last year or two. And what these media reports have suggested is that that physical activity or exercise does not help with obesity, and in fact can lead to weight gain. And these reports, these articles have been significantly flawed. So these are media reports that are in Newsweek and Time, and what happens is that the journalists are misquoting researchers, they're misinterpreting the results of studies, and the reports are based on flawed studies themselves. So I'm going to give you 2 examples. This came out in March of this year, and it had a very, it's not a very good public health message in terms of exercise and weight loss, abandon all hope. It doesn't send a very nice message to people in terms of when we're trying to help people become more active. And this study was based on the fact that it was one study with women that basically showed that women need to be doing an hour a day of exercise to be physically active. And again, these news reports are written by journalists. They're not researchers. So they're taking research studies and trying to interpret them and putting them into the mainstream media. And unfortunately, this is what reaches the mainstream media. This study was flawed because they didn't control for what people ate, or what their diet was. So it's possible that people that were doing an hour a day were also more likely to have a healthier diet, and that may have influenced the results. So there were, and the other issue was they didn't control for intensity of physical activity. There were several issues with the study that they based this on, but they had this big media report. And in fact, this media report actually referenced another article that said, in Time, that they called this Time article a tremendously influential article that was very important. So this was the Time article that they referred to. And this was an article about the myth about exercise. And it says, of course, it's good for you, but it won't help you lose weight. And it talked about how exercise may actually help increase somebody's appetite, which then would lead to more weight gain if you exercised. Again, this is not the message we want to send to the public. And unfortunately, this is what is out in the mainstream media. So what I want to talk to you about today is what we know in the research world, not the mainstream world, in terms of the role of exercise on preventing obesity. I could go on and and talk about many, many studies in this area, but I want to highlight 2 studies that are related to obesity and exercise. In this particular study, participants were 3,683, mostly women, and what they did is they found women who had lost at least 13.6 grams of weight and had maintained that weight loss for over a year. They have an amazing weight registry database where women and men will sign up if they've lost weight, and they do surveys on them. And about almost 90% of the women reported using physical activity as part of their weight loss strategy. So most of them used it along with diet. So they were doing both. And in this article, they concluded that the amount of physical activity was highly variable, so it was difficult to determine how much physical activity is actually necessary to be done. So this article is basically saying, yes, exercise is an important part, along with a healthy diet, for preventing obesity and maintaining a weight loss, but we really don't know yet how much people should be doing. In the second study, they took 203 middle-aged women and randomly assigned them to two groups. One group received diet counseling, plus a home-based exercise program where they did exercise at home, or just the diet counseling alone. And what they found was that the dietary counseling, so the people that got both exercise and diet lost more weight at 6 months than the people that only got the diet counseling. There weren't any differences at 12 months, but this is a good study in terms of really trying to separate out the diet component versus the exercise component, which hasn't been done tremendously well in the literature. So those are a couple of studies stating that, the bottom line that I would say based on the literature, and some researchers may argue against this, but I would say exercise is very important in terms of preventing obesity, losing weight, maintaining weight loss, but it is really important. There is some data to suggest that even, especially for women more so than men, that it's important to combine exercise with a healthy diet. So given that, so we know that exercise is an important part, how can we get women and girls to exercise? We conducted a study that was funded by the National Institutes of Health, and what we did is just to give you an example of some of the components that we found to be effective for helping people become more physically active. So we took 440 adults, mostly women, randomly assigned them to a motivationally tailored physical activity intervention program, which I'll talk about the components of those in a minute, which we delivered through the mail. So we delivered different messages to women and men based on how they completed questionnaires, or a contact control condition. So it was a health and wellness condition. It didn't focus on exercise, but it did focus on stress and other kinds of wellness issues. And the individuals in our study were at about 20 minutes when they started. The people in the print or the intervention group actually went up to 180 minutes of physical activity per week and continued to climb to 190 minutes at 12 months. Our control group actually did really well. We had them monitor their physical activity every day and answer questionnaires about their physical activity, so we think that in and of itself influenced them to actually increase to 140 minutes. Not quite as good as our print or intervention group, but they actually did fairly well, better than we expected. So based on this study, we looked at different components that we thought that led to our effective results. And some of the important things that we found for individuals are listed here. One of the big things is goal setting, in terms of setting realistic goals about how much physical activity you want to engage in. So if you're doing no activity, saying I'm going to do 5 days a week, every week, and after a couple weeks that might get to be too much and overwhelming, we say, just start with 2 15-minute walks a week. You got to start slowly and work your way up. So setting realistic goals. Writing down your physical activity each day. I set a New Year's resolution 11 years ago to do 5 days a week, and I put stars on a calendar every time I exercised for a full year until it became a habit, and I haven't broken it since then, other than when I had my 3 children for a few weeks. So logging physical activity is really important, and you can see that in the control group that I showed. All they were doing was writing down how much physical activity they did. Self-efficacy is your confidence to being physically active, so how confident you think you can fit physical activity into your day. Behavioral strategies, is about reminding yourself to be physically active, leaving your gym shoes in the middle of the floor so you have to trip over them every time to remind yourself to be physically active, rewarding yourself for being physically active, weighing the pros and cons of being physically active, thinking about the barriers that you have to overcome to be physically active, cognitive processes, knowing about the benefits of physical activity. That's another one. So just to wrap it up, the rate of, just to summarize everything, the rate of obesity is high among both women and girls. And the recommendations are to do at least 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week of physical activity. More than that is better, but 2 days is better than 0. And people will say, what are the key tips on sticking with the physical activity program? One of the biggest things that I always tell people is schedule physical activity like you would an appointment. My kids are 6, 4, and 1, and on any given Tuesday, just as an example, my husband gets up at 5:30, runs to CrossFit, runs home at 6:30. I literally run out for a run, and I've actually gotten faster since my kids were born because I have to run back fast. And I run back, I get home, he takes the younger 2 kids to daycare, I get the older kid on the bus, and then he gets to work, I scramble to work, and somehow I take a shower in there. So we have it, and that's our Tuesdays. Our Wednesday's a little different, but every day is different, and we have it, every Sunday night, we work out our schedule for the week, and we have it all figured out, and we schedule it like any other appointment, and that's what works. But I always tell people, write it into your calendar, write it, I'm gonna take a walk at lunch, so you treat it like any other appointment. Find an activity that you love, whether it be walking outside or doing something that you really enjoy, getting back into sports that you used to do. And like I talked about before, setting realistic goals is also very, very important. And one of the things when you achieve those goals, how you feel about yourself. And I always talk to people about you get to the point where mentally you need physical activity to feel good mentally, and so to get to that point is important. So those are just some things that I often tell people in terms of increasing physical activity. So with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Bar Anderson. I think I can, yes, okay.
First of all, I want to thank the Tucker Center for inviting me to be a part of this panelist. I don't think I've ever been called distinguished before, so thank you for that. So I am responsible for talking about obesity prevention among minority females, and specifically African American females, and talking how physical activity fits in. So a general outline of my presentation, I'm going to go into a bit more detail in terms of race ethnicity differences for overweight and obesity for females, so girls and for women. Talk a little bit about the physical activity recommendations that we have for youth and for adults. And then my research really focuses on the environment related to physical activity. So I'll explain a little why that's important, focusing on the environment when it comes to talking about physical activity. And then I will end my presentation giving you just little snippets of some research projects that I'm currently working on. So as Dr. Kane alluded to during her introduction, and as Dr. Lewis also stated, you'll see that for those who are overweight, so these are girls ages 6 to 19 years old, that the non-Hispanic blacks and Hispanic females, they have higher rates of overweight than their non-Hispanic white counterparts. And when you're looking at these higher levels of obesity, so with the BMI percentile greater than the 95th percentile, you see that, once again, the non-Hispanic blacks have the highest rates of obesity, followed by the Hispanic girls. And when you get to even those higher levels, you're still seeing that discrepancy between the minority girls and the non-Hispanic white girls. Looking at rates of overweight and obesity with women greater than the age of 20 years old, want to look at this first column first, those who are considered overweight. You'll see that almost 80% of minority women are classified as overweight compared to only about 60% of non-Hispanic whites. And thinking about what Dr. Lewis said in terms of the more severe the obesity is, the more severe the negative health outcomes. When you're looking at kind of stage 2 obesity and stage 3 obesity, you're seeing that the rates of obesity are greatest for non-Hispanic black women. And when it's about even for non-Hispanic white and Hispanic women. So Dr. Lewis gave a very compelling argument of why physical activity is important, and I felt that we needed to review the current guidelines when it comes to youth, so children and adolescents, and also for adults. So the government recommends that youth participate in at least 60 minutes of physical activity on a daily basis. And this physical activity should be of both moderate and vigorous in terms of intensity, and be a combination of aerobic exercises, so using large muscle groups, doing some muscle strengthening and some bone strengthening types of exercises. I am also interested in sedentary behavior, and I think it's very important when you're talking about energy expenditure. So I just wanted to share those guidelines with you too. So the American Academy of Pediatrics, they recommend that youth, so children and adolescents, participate or are engaged in less than 2 hours of quality screen time daily. And screen time is computer use, television time, video game use, watching movies on a daily basis. Our current adult physical activity recommendations, first of all, the main point with the recommendations is that adults need to avoid inactivity as much as possible, and doing something is better than doing nothing. But if you want to experience at least some substantial health benefits, it's recommended that adults participate in at least 150 minutes of moderate intensity, so that's about 2.5 hours of moderate intensity activity per week, and at least 75 minutes of vigorous activity, or what's best is a combination of the two. For adults to see even more benefits, it's recommended that they double that amount of physical activity, so participating in at least 5 hours of moderate activity and then 2.5 hours of vigorous intensity activity. And wanting to make sure that these activities occur in at least 10-minute bouts in terms of their length. Research has shown repeatedly that just fitting in 10 minutes of physical activity 3 times a day is just as beneficial as if you were doing longer bouts on a daily basis. And it's also preferred that adults spread their physical activity throughout the week. So avoid being like these weekend warriors, you know, the folks who they're sedentary Monday through Friday, and then on Saturday they'll get up at 6 o'clock in the morning and run 2 hours. Or do some hiking or for something for the extended period of time. You do see more health benefits when you sprinkle your physical activity throughout the week as opposed to that one long bout once a week. So given the physical activity recommendations, I also wanted to show you a little about the physical activity levels for both girls and for women. These data are from the YRBS, which is the Youth Risk Behavior Survey. And so for those who met the recommendation, so notice that these data are from 2007. The current recommendation for youth, which states that 60 minutes or more every day of the week, did not come out or were not published until 2008. And the previous recommendation for youth were 60 minutes at least 5 days per week. So meeting the recommendation is based on that old recommendation of only 5 days a week as compared to the current recommendation of 7 days per week. So just keep that in mind when looking at these data. And you'll see that, so the recommendation is defined as those high school girls who reported being engaged in at least 60 minutes of moderate or vigorous physical activity at least 5 days out of the previous 7 days. And you see that the minority girls, non-Hispanic blacks, 21%, and about 22% of Hispanic girls compared to almost 28% of non-Hispanic white girls reported meeting the recommendation. So seeing those lower levels of physical activity in the minority girls. And then those who reported no participation in physical activity, and this non-participation was defined as not having participated in any physical activity in the previous 7 days. And you see that the minority girls have a higher percentage compared to the non-Hispanic white girls, with the non-Hispanic black girls having the higher compared to the Hispanic girls. And then looking at data from on women from 2007 from the CDC and specifically NHANES, which is the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey. Looking at those in terms of those women who met the recommendation, and meeting the recommendation is defined as those women who reported being engaged in at least 30 minutes of physical activity for at least 5 days in the previous 7 days. And you see about half of non-Hispanic white women reported meeting the recommendations, and you see lower rates or lower percentages for the Hispanic and for the non-Hispanic blacks, with non-Hispanic blacks having the lowest percentage. And then those who reported, or those women who reported being inactive, once again, seeing that about double the percentage of minority women reported being inactive. And the definition for inactivity for this these data, is someone who reported not engaging in at least 10 minutes of moderate or vigorous physical activity in the previous 7 days. So these women weren't even doing 10 minutes over the previous 7 days. So you're seeing constantly within girls and also within women that there are distinct discrepancies between the non-Hispanic white females compared to minority females, and then with non-Hispanic black women having even poorer behavior than their Hispanic counterparts. So physical activity, there's so many components and so many facets of physical activity, and there's so much that influences this behavior. Things related to demographic factors, biological, emotional, psychological, cognitive, demographic, behavioral attributes. So there's lots of things that contribute to physical activity. I have a special interest in the environment, and we're going to go in that direction. Let's go to this slide first, and then we'll backtrack to the slide that I just skipped. So since we've seen the increase in obesity over the past couple of decades, our genetics have not really changed, but we can definitely see how our environment related to physical activity especially, and then also related to diet, because I do have an interest in looking at food environments, have really changed. What used to be more common is seeing kind of this lots of road and street connectivity, places, sidewalks where folks can walk. But what is becoming more commonplace as suburbs continue to grow, you see these cul-de-sacs, you see that the lack of accessibility or the easy accessibility to many places, and it just makes it more difficult to walk and to build in physical activity into your lifestyle. What we want to see are like more availability and accessibility to parks and trails and to physical activity resources. This is the ideal situation. And when we talk about the environment, it's not only important to talk about the physical environment, but also thinking about the social environment. So those social interactions that people are come in contact with that could be influencing their behavior, whether increasing or decreasing their likelihood of being more physically active, and thinking about the different types of environment. You have the home family environment, school, work environment, and then always thinking about the larger neighborhood or community environments that could have an influence on how active you are. So I want to make sure I stay respectful with the time. So I just want to talk very briefly about two projects that I have going on that is looking at environmental influences related to physical activity. The first one is Double A EDGE, and the second one is A Family Affair. So Double A EDGE, it stands for African Americans, Exercise, Diet, Girls, and Environments. And it was a project funded by the Powell Center here on campus, where I was examining environmental factors associated with overweight and obesity in African American girls, adolescent girls, so those 11 through 18, wanting to look at their neighborhood environments, their school environments, their family home environments, and these are some of the factors that we were interested in really exploring. And you will also notice that we didn't just focus on physical activity, but also the food environment, and wanted to see how these different environments, both from the social and the physical aspect, was related to the girls' behaviors and specifically physical activity and diet. There were two parts to this study. The first part is taking a qualitative assessment, so looking at both the perceived and objective factors associated with the girls' different environments. And then study two, which I am just getting started, that is creating a quantitative survey and linking it with geographic information system or environmental data. So I really will skim over study two throughout this, for this presentation. So with study one, there are two aims. I first conducted, I say I, and I shouldn't say I because my research assistants who helped me are in the audience, and they, we conducted focus groups with African American adolescent girls and an adult female, which were all their mothers, to really explore these environmental factors. And then we also wanted to, so with the focus groups, we were able to get perceptions related to what was influencing the girls' behaviors. But we were also interested in also the objective factors, and so we did a home environmental assessment of the physical activity and food resources in the home. So, and I say we when I really didn't do this, they went into the homes and looked in the participants' cabinets, in their not closets, in their rooms. Oh, they weren't supposed to look in closets. If they opened the door, they could look into the closet. But we really did a very thorough inventory related to physical activity and their media resources. So the number of TVs that they have, the computers that they have, DVDs, that they had available, were working, video game systems. And really that was of interest was the food inventory. So going in and looking at the healthy and unhealthy foods that they had readily available, easy to access, both on the counters and in the refrigerator. So when you first open the refrigerator, what are the foods that you see right away? Because we figure those are the ones that you'll grab. So if you see yogurt compared to some ice cream when you open the refrigerator, it may make a difference in the choices that they make. So the focus groups, we conducted 6 focus groups with the adolescent girls, 3 with middle school and 3 with high school. We wanted to stay age appropriate. And then we conducted focus groups with their mothers, middle school and high school separate. And because of a special circumstance, we had one-on-one interview. And then I've already kind of explained the home assessment, things that we were looking for. Because of time, I'm not really able to go into results for this study, but I'm hoping with Dr. Lavoie, with the Tucker table, that one day in the spring, I will present my findings, so you all can come to the Tucker table over in Cook Hall. But one thing I do want to say is that we did learn more about the food environment than we did the physical activity environment. But what we did learn about the physical activity environment is the social interactions between girls and their mothers, that they were wanting those interactions and they were interested in being physically active together. And then they talked about some of the barriers that you commonly hear, time for all populations, but then we also heard about hair, which is specific to African American populations. If you want to know more about the hair issue, I can tell you 101. I don't have time right now. Which was, if those who have seen me over the year, you see me go through different hair phases, and it has to do with my physical activity. So using the information learned from the Double A Edge, we are in the process now of developing a home-based and a community-based physical activity and healthy eating program based on the girls saying and the mother saying that they would like to exercise together. So we're wanting to build in that social support type of program for targeting girls 11 to 13 years of age, African American girls 11 to 13 years, and the secondary audience is their African American mothers. And this project is funded by the General Mills Foundation. And so we've already completed the formative assessment focus groups, and so with those focus groups, we really want this program to be driven by what the girls want and their mothers want, and not by what we think they should have. So that's the reason why we had those focus groups. And we're still in the very early preliminary stages, but some things that it seems like the program is shaping to be a 12-week program. It's going to take place in the spring. with at least a 2.5 hour weekly session, which is going to be a combination of some physical activity and then some hands-on cooking and plus nutritional education. And we're building social support into both of those components. And then most of the intervention is going to be home-based, where we'll be working with them, just like Dr. Lewis said, how important it is in terms of setting goals, working with the participants to set their own goals, and then giving them encouragement. We're having some physical activity and cooking contests, and just came back from a conference where someone who's very influential in the field of environmental factors related to physical activity, he gave me a little tidbit that they're working on a review now, reviewing what are the things within the environment that really influences physical activity. And it's been consistently shown from the work that they've done that the availability of home equipment is really important. So we're going to build that in, since we got that nice piece of information from this very reputable source. So I think my time is up. I want to thank everyone who has helped me, especially my research assistant. And those who are here, could you stand up really quickly? Just want to give you a clap. There's Jackie and there's Alexis. Brittany should be here someplace. So thank you very much. And so I guess next will be Dr. Diane Newmark-Steiner.
So all this talk about physical activity, and it's almost 8 o'clock at night. Do people just want to stretch a little so no one falls asleep during my talk? It's okay, you can just stretch or stand. Nope, okay. So first of all, thank you to Provost Sullivan and to Dr. Kane for being here and for those wonderful introductions, and to Dr. Bauer Anderson and Dr. Lewis for setting the background for this important field. I'm going to be talking about one specific project with which we have been involved. It evolved from work that our students were doing many years ago, and we have just finished our evaluation. So I'm going to be talking about the program and its evaluation. Up. Okay. I want to thank Colleen, do you want to just stand up? Colleen Flatham is our intervention director, and Sarah Friend is our evaluation director, and they really ran this study along with the rest of our team. It's a lot of work to go into schools and do community-based interventions, so much thanks to them and to our funders at the NIH. So we've been talking about obesity and physical activity here, and I want to broaden it just a bit. The way that I see it is that there are a number of weight-related problems that are prevalent among adolescent girls, and they are listed here, and they include not only obesity and physical activity, but are also related to eating disorders, body dissatisfaction, and the use of unhealthy weight control behaviors. When you look at the statistics, you see that the majority of young girls have some type of weight-related problem. And what we also see from our research is that there is overlap. So an overweight adolescent girl is likely to have a poor body dissatisfaction, be engaging in less than the ideal amount of physical activity. She's likely to be using unhealthy weight control behaviors, and she may be at risk for an eating disorder. So this is the type of research that guided our approach in New Moves. And what our research has been aiming to see is, can we work simultaneously toward the prevention of all of these weight-related problems? And more recently, can we take advantage of the national and international interest in obesity to push forward an agenda where we're not only talking about obesity, but also talking about risk factors for eating disorders such as body dissatisfaction, unhealthy weight control behaviors, et cetera. So these have been the guiding questions of our research. And one of the programs that we've been working on is New Moves. We've been working on this for probably 8 to 10 years in different renditions of the program. We started small and then got bigger and bigger. So today I'd like to briefly describe the program and some of our main outcome findings. Our program was designed to meet the needs of overweight girls or sedentary girls at risk for becoming overweight, with a particular a particular interest in reaching out to the girls that don't have access to clinical facilities, don't have the time to go to a clinic treatment program 3 times a week, and those girls at greatest risk for low physical activity and obesity. We wanted to incorporate principles from the fields of both obesity and eating disorders in order to prevent that broad spectrum of weight-related problems. This is our underlying philosophy, and it differs to some other programs. Our main philosophy is that we want the girls to feel so good about themselves and so good about their bodies that they will want to take care of them. We want to bring about positive changes in behaviors. We want to help larger girls feel good in a thin-oriented society, and we want to prevent the use of unhealthy weight control behaviors. Our program is run in schools. The primary component is an all-girls physical education piece. So we did an extensive needs assessment, and what came out of that was that many of the girls who are larger or who don't feel that comfortable with their bodies or who don't feel that comfortable with their level of physical activity don't want to participate in a co-ed physical education class. So that was the impetus for our program, and then we added these different components to it. What I'm going to do is, instead of talking about the program, I'm going to put on a short movie clip that has me talking, but you'll also see the girls and see some of the activities, okay? New Moves is a program for adolescent girls who are at risk for becoming overweight due to sedentary lifestyles.
New Moves changed the way I eat. I learned to have more confidence in myself.
When I look in the mirror, I see a beautiful, independent young lady.
When I look in the mirror, I see a phenomenal woman.
New Moves is about feeling good about yourself, wanting to take care of yourself, and within that, it's being physically active, eating healthy foods, but really just having a positive relationship with your body, with physical activity, and with food.
We offer nutrition and social support, self-empowerment sessions. We want them to feel so good about themselves that they will want to engage in healthy eating and healthy physical activity behaviors.
One group is going to get strength training, the other group is going to get aerobic exercise. Look through the girl pages using these 3 chapters and find all of the benefits and reasons why your type of exercise is the best type of exercise there is.
It gets your heart beating. Yes. There's running, soccer, tennis, biking, Pilates, kayaking, dance, water aerobics.
It's like play basketball,
ride a bike,
swim,
tennis,
soccer,
yoga.
and smile while you're doing it. Just have fun.
We tried to do a variety of activities that would interest the girls and show them different kinds of strength training moves and different types of games, activities, things they could do to have fun and be active at the same time, and tried to really emphasize that you didn't just need to play a sport or something very traditional in order to be active.
I love New Moves program. It's nothing like your regular gym class. You get to be free, do what you want to do, and it's all girls.
In addition to the physical education class, we also did something that really is unique. We have integrated individual counseling using motivational interviewing into our intervention. They utilize motivational interviewing techniques to really get at specific behaviors that the girls themselves want to change.
When we think of other things we talk about in New Moves, are there other goals that you would like to work on in order to improve your health?
I think I really want to try to make better choices at lunch. They usually have like the boring old lunches or whatever, but like today I had chow mein and had vegetables and stuff, and I took advantage of the salad bar. At the salad bar they have fruits and they have different vegetables and of course salad.
We offer lunch bunches in our maintenance component of the program, so after they finish the intensive daily program, they go to a once-a-week program where they meet for lunch.
Vegetables.
At the lunch bunches, we model some of the behavior changes that we want them working on, like fruits and vegetables, and even just eating lunch if some of the girls are skipping lunch sometimes, because we don't want them skipping meals.
it's not going to be enough to send a report card home telling parents that their child is overweight. We are going to need more intensive interventions. And this is what we're trying in New Moves. Help the girls feel good about themselves, teach them the skills for engaging in healthy eating and enjoyable physical activity, and provide an environment within the school that makes it possible for them to engage in these discussions and in these behaviors. So that gives you a flavor for what we're doing, and hopefully for those of you who are thinking of going into this area, motivates you to go out in the schools and try to do something a little differently. For those of us, for Dahia and Colleen and Sarah, we love to see the girls up there. All right, so now I'm going to talk about I could say a lot more, but I'm just going to move now to the evaluation of the program. We did a group randomized trial, so we had 12 schools within the Twin City area, 6 urban and 6 inner ring suburban schools that participated in our evaluation. 6 schools received the full intervention, and 6 schools received an all-girls physical education class. So they also received an intervention, but without all the supplementary activities. The class was run in the fall semester. We had maintenance activities going on in the spring semester, and the evaluation was done prior to the intervention, after the class, and at the end of the school year. Our girls, about half of them were overweight, and as you can see, very, very diverse from in race, ethnicity. Only 24% were white, and the rest were Black, Asian, primarily Hmong, Hispanic, and other backgrounds. We assessed physical activity and sedentary activity using the 3D PAR. So the girls reported their level of physical activity. They report what activities they're doing in half-hour blocks throughout the day. So what is the activity that you were doing between 3:30 and 4 in the afternoon? We measured unhealthy weight control behaviors in the past month. You can see those listed here. And we measured body satisfaction, satisfaction with different components of the body, and self-worth using the Harder scale. And then we were lucky, we were able to use the General Clinical Research Center here at the University of Minnesota. So we were able to do assessments of body composition, percent body fat, and then we looked at BMI. Just a bit about our analysis. I'm going to be showing you follow-up means that are adjusted for our baseline means, and you'll see the intervention effects, which show the differences in the adjusted outcomes at follow-up, so at the end of the school year, in the intervention as compared to the control conditions. So let me show you, let me get you oriented to this slide here. Okay, so physical activity, these are blocks of 30-minute blocks. So 4 blocks would supposedly be 2 hours of physical activity, although they're not active for that whole 30-minute block. It's what they're doing for the majority of the time. This is the baseline mean. We bring it to a common mean. This is the adjusted follow-up mean. And what I really want you to look at is the intervention effect. So the intervention girls increased their physical activity by a little over 1 30-minute block per day, which bordered on statistical significance. They decreased their sedentary activity by a similar amount, and that just reached statistical significance. Looking at unhealthy weight control behaviors, take a look at these numbers. You see that the majority of the girls, about 2/3 of the girls, were engaging in unhealthy weight control behaviors. And what we see is that at follow-up, there was a decline in 14%. So 14% fewer intervention girls reported the use of unhealthy weight control behaviors at follow-up as compared to the control group, which was a very positive finding. We also saw significant improvements in body image and in overall self-worth. However, we did not see statistically significant improvements in BMI or percent body fat. So you see here, in the intervention group, there was a decrease of a mean decrease of 0.5% of body fat as compared to the control group, but this was not statistically significant. In addition, we saw significant increases in what we call precursors to behavior, so self-efficacy to be physically active, goal setting to be physically active, things of that nature. The intervention girls reported receiving more support from those in their social environments. Probably the biggest indicator of the program's success is that it really fit a niche within the schools. The girls that were taking this class, their teachers, they really felt like the girls wanted and needed this type of approach, and it actually continues to be implemented in most of the schools. Out of the 12 intervention and control schools, the control schools had some training afterwards. 10 of those schools are still implementing some type of program. Now you'll see it kind of fades off. None of them are doing the lunch bunches or the individual counseling, but they are doing the all-girls environment, the strength training choice of activities, and about half of them are doing the nutrition and the social support components. So, it suggests that there is interest in doing this. However, we need more resources if schools are going to be doing the full program. Some of the challenges, the questions that we've been asking ourselves, one is, did our control group get too much of an intervention? Just participating in an all-girls PE class with girls who were similar to you, so similar in terms of their sedentary activity, is in and of itself an intervention. A big question is, can school-based programs have an impact on young people who have serious challenges in their lives? And when you go into the St. Paul public schools, there are some kids who really are facing a lot of stress in their homes, and it's so important to reach out to these kids, but it's not easy. How effective can school programs be in preventing obesity? And the question that I've really wanted to answer and was only partially able to answer with this study is, can we use this integrated approach to prevent this broad spectrum of weight-related problems? We saw that we were able to prevent some things, but not the obesity. So in conclusion, the program was very well received. It was effective in decreasing sedentary activity, in decreasing unhealthy weight control behaviors, in improving body image and self-esteem, but not in decreasing BMI and percent body fat. And this study joins many, many others who really suggest the complexity of decreasing BMI. So many factors contribute to excessive weight gain, and that's why it's so important for us to work in the area of prevention. And clearly, further work is needed to understand if we can work toward the prevention of weight-related problems, and I invite those of you who are students to join in our mission. This is our website. You can go to the website. You can download all of our evaluation tools and all of the intervention materials. I don't know if you saw in the movie those nice pages, the girl pages. We have some examples outside, but everything can be downloaded here for free. And our article is just coming out that describes more of the results. So with that, I will end, and thank you very much.
There'll be 2 wireless mics in the audience.
And if you could just keep your comments brief and your questions brief, so we make sure that we get a sampling of a lot of the questions in the audience, and I'm sure there's many. So if you have a question, just raise your hand. Julie and myself will have a mic, and we'll try to get to you. Is that Kent down there?
Thanks. Great presentations. This past weekend, I was at the conference of the Organization for the Study of Communication, Language, and Gender. And something that came up on my panel and a couple others is that there are cultural differences in images of beauty, and particularly with African American community, it's apparently, they have an image of beauty that means that a woman should be bigger, even overweight, even quite a bit overweight, as compared with the dominant culture where obviously the image should be thinness and so on. And so, whereas with the dominant culture, we have like this sort of objectives that are very congruent with like being good looking, being physically fit, having a healthy diet. Those might be quite incongruent in minority communities. And so how do we reconcile or confront or combat these cultural complexities?
Well, I'll start and then I'll let Dr. Newhart-Steiner finish up. But I think that, first of all, it needs to be understood that we all have just these cultural differences are really not saying, because you made a comment saying that for the dominant culture, it's about looking good and being thin. I think we just have different definitions of what looks good, and we have, the research repeatedly shows for African American communities and for Hispanic communities that a larger body size is just more acceptable in these populations. But with that being said, I think that you raise a very good point, because I think it's a very fine line, and that's getting to eating disorders and how you view yourself and what kind of impact that has on your health, because it's good to have a healthy self-esteem and to feel good about what size you are if you're a larger size, but keeping in mind we need to make sure and think about the health impact that could have. So I just think of, I've done in the past some research with African Americans and body image, and seeing that, you know, the body image is more acceptable, a larger body image is more acceptable for African Americans, but I think that we're missing an issue in terms of like how much of that body image could, not how much, but it's more so of like, that it's a very thin line. I think that having the healthy body image is one thing, but if it's at the consequence of your health, what does that really mean? And are those feelings really true? Meaning, is it as true as people allow, or as you see a lot in the media too, of plus size African American women feeling very good about the size that they are they really feeling as good as they say that they are when you know that you're plagued with these health issues? I'll let Diane take over and talk about some of her research from here.
Well, I just want to add two things. We did a study actually that led to New Moves, and we interviewed overweight adolescent girls in the Twin Cities. We had 25 white girls and 25 black girls participate. And although the black girls were more acceptable of a moving, flowing body, they didn't want to be overweight either. And I think that's important to understand. And secondly, the whole issue of, I think there's kind of this feeling, oh, well, you know, if, they're overweight and feel okay with it, so they're not going to do anything about their body shape. The research actually shows that young girls who feel better about their bodies do more physical activity and end up gaining less weight over time. And, you know, if you think about an adolescent girl who, you know, who might not feel that good about her body, well, is she likely to go to the gym, and what is she? So, you know, I think sometimes we have to avoid, and I'm not saying that you're doing this, but, you know, it's a really complex issue. Yeah. So thank you for asking that question, because it's really thought-provoking.
Great, other questions? All right, down here.
Hi, thanks for talking. I'm a PhD student over in communication studies, and I had a question that I think maybe brings the last two studies into conversation with each other in terms of, I wanted you to speak more about home life, and especially about getting young women to eat healthy. You could do that at school, but I'm wondering how successful it is to do it at home. Because the home life that I had, if I asked my mom to buy tofu instead of ground beef, she told me, "Are you crazy? We don't have money for that," you know? And so, and I know that the schools that you're talking about in St. Paul, you know, the poverty is an issue. So I just wondering if you could speak, anybody could speak more about how home life and poverty kind of, you know, play into your studies or what you're talking about.
Well, I'll start. Because I have an interest of looking at these home-based interventions. And I think over the past probably 10 to 15 years, there was an influx of school-based interventions, thinking this is a great way to capture our youth. You know, they have to go to school. You know, they are more likely to participate because we have it kind of embedded in their school day, the intervention. But you're missing that one key piece, especially when you're dealing with your youth, with children and adolescents, that a lot of their decision making is not made by the children, but made by the parents. So, which is one of the driving forces of why I'm so interested in home-based interventions. I think is really important, of not just focusing on making these changes for the youth within the school setting, but wanting to capture a larger part of their lives and those bigger influential factors within their lives. I mean, you can give a child exposure in terms of what types of healthy foods and how important physical activity is to incorporate into their lives, but if they're not making the choices related to their purchasing in terms of the foods, it could be almost null and void. So I think it's really like, and I think, I mean, I'm not the only person who thinks that, because you're seeing more of how they're trying to incorporate the larger environment of youth in terms of trying to make these behavioral changes.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I mean, I think the point that you bring up about socioeconomic differences, and you know, sometimes I listen to us researchers talk, and I think, oh, you know, get real. This is not what is going on in the lives of many families. So, you know, and the research does show, and we know that the people who have less money are more likely to be overweight, and whatever the roots are, you know, that has to do with not having enough food as a child and wanting to make sure you have it later, or the types of food that are available, or we live in a culture where everyone wants to go out to eat, and what kind of restaurant can you afford to go to? So, yeah, I think we have to be real cognizant of the points that you raised.
I think also the home life issue can be applied to physical activity as well. So giving your kids opportunities to be physically active, having it being stressed. In some places, it's not safe to go outside alone after dark, or having, and there aren't places to play. There's busy roads. So I think it can apply to diet, but also physical activity as well. So.
I have one more quick comment because of the fact that I focus on African American communities. I think that, you know, we have very good intentions as researchers that we want to improve the behaviors of our populations of interest, but I think it's really important for us to also consider all the things that's going on in someone's life. Like if, especially those with lower SES, if you're having trouble paying your rent, or there's, you know, you're not safe in your neighborhood, or you're combating lead in the home that you live in because of the paint or whatnot, physical activity and eating healthy may not be at the top of your priority list. And so I think I'm trying to be more mindful as I do these types of research and programs of not only addressing the issue related to health and wellness, but also trying to incorporate what's important in my participants' life, and hopefully, you know, addressing their needs, and then they're being interested in what I'm interested in, that will make just better progress in all aspects of their lives.
I have a methodological question. I don't know this body of knowledge very well, but when you all, each of you were sharing what the literature is suggesting, you talked, I think, almost exclusively in terms of self-report data. And self-report data always makes me really nervous, particularly around such highly charged social, psychological, economic factors as girls and women and body image and exercise. So how does is most of the, I guess, so here's my question. Is most of the data in your body of knowledge relying on self-report data, or are there ways that you can get sort of independent assessments of these reports?
We often use the actigraph, which is which is a monitor that's worn at the waist, and it measures activity up and down, back. It's not just a pedometer; it actually measures movement. The problem is that it's you can't wear it when you're swimming. People forget to put it on. They drop it. It resets. There's lots of technological aspects with that. So I know with kids, and you can comment more with that, but the actigraph is often used as well. So, but with the weight data, that's obviously weighing, I don't know if that's typically weighing in, on a scale, but the physical activity data is often self-report, but sometimes validated with actigraph data as well.
But you do still see a lot of self-reported data when it comes to physical activity because the actigraph are very expensive. Like one monitor is $500. And so if you don't have the funds, and if you're like me, just trying to get your research agenda off the ground, Dean Kwan, can I have a couple $1,000s for some actigraphs?
The provost is actually sitting right here.
That's even better. Provost Sullivan, may I have some funds, please? We do have a lot of self-reported data, but there's a 2008 paper looking at actigraph data in children, and you're seeing kind of the same trends that you see off the data that I reported, so it's similar.
What are the requirements for physical education in the schools? It's been a long time since I've had kids in school. And what are the challenges that schools face in providing phy-ed? We used to have all-girls phy-ed. I'm sure we did it 3-4 times a week from elementary school through high school. I'm sure it's not like that anymore.
Actually served on the American. Oh, sure. The question is there a minimum requirement for physical education, and what are the kind of the views on what it should be implemented? Am I right? Yeah. So I've been serving on the American Heart Association Midwest affiliate, who's a big advocate of getting physical education in the schools more than it is now. Actually, the requirements up until this bill was passed last spring was that you had to have physical education, period. And that could literally be an hour a year. So there was no minimum. So what they worked towards is actually to get a half a credit in the high school. So now that's the set minimum, and that's what was just passed. So to answer your question, it's very, very minimal. And in terms of and I think that there are lots of people trying to work towards that, but there was a lot of pushback by legislation in terms of, there was one senator saying that, well, I want my daughter to be able to take Spanish, and she can't take Spanish, so she's going to have to take PE. And she already does sports, so that's a whole idea of, well, they already do sports, so they don't need PE. But it's not, PE is about learning to love to be physically active. And so I think that now with the obesity rates going up, I think they're starting to look at it more and hopefully pushing it back into the schools more. And that's a minimum. There are plenty of schools that do more than that. But it varies by school.
Well, we found with our new move schools that the high schools were either requiring the girls and the boys, but we were just working with the girls, to do either 1 or 2 semesters throughout their high school career.
I have a question for Diane on your study. I can't remember if you mentioned it in the video, how long of a period of time it covered, because you mentioned that you didn't have significant results for a reduction in BMI, and what you think contributed to that. If you were going to change something, what would you change?
Oh gosh, the $20,000 question. Okay, so our program was 1 semester. Okay, they met pretty much every day, 4 days a week for physical activity, 1 day a week for either nutrition or social support, and then in the following semester they met about once a week, plus the individual sessions, which we had about 5 throughout the year. What would I change? I think the main thing that I would change is to widen the program so it's a comprehensive school-based program. This was just, a class in physical education, and I really think that, we need to see a change in the school environment, what's going on with food in the school, what's going on with other opportunities for physical activity, for opening up for providing opportunities It's not a problem for athletes, but our girls were not student athletes, so what other opportunities can we provide for them? What I wouldn't do is we really tried to stay away from making this a weight-focused class. We didn't, and I wouldn't go more intense in that area. Maybe involve the families more.
Okay, we have time for one more question.
I was just going to ask if you had suggestions. Oh, okay.
Hi, I teach health and PE at a tribal community college in northern Minnesota, and I have two questions. Did you get a chance, or have you ever looked into the Native American issues with being more rural? And when you were talking about segregated PE, were they successful because they were more of the overweight girls, or do you feel segregated PE is a trend that we should continue between boys and girls?
Can you just, the first question?
I teach at a community college focusing with Native Americans, so I'm just wondering if you ever studied women in that population.
We have done epidemiological research on the Native American community. I used some data early on, and also within our Project EAT study. And what you generally see within these studies are similar problems and high prevalences of the disordered eating behavior. So not only the obesity, but also the really unhealthy weight control behavior. So it's definitely a concern there. My background is actually not PE, so I'm going to defer to other people, but I'll tell you what I think. I think that Title IX was great. It brought about great changes. When I was in high school, we had girls and boys separately, but it wasn't equal. The girls got a lot less than the boys. And I think by bringing things together and making them equal, it really, really advanced PE opportunities for girls, but not for all girls. For some girls, that model doesn't work well. So I think we need to have different options where, co-ed, but also this girls only model for those girls who it might be more suitable for. I don't know what you think.
Well, it's been a couple of years since I've looked at the literature, probably about 5 years, but when I was working on my PhD at the University of Maryland, I worked on this project, and it was for a PE class for all girls, middle school. And for one of our intervention schools, we segregated, or had separate gender, I guess I should say, separate gender PE classes. And we followed these girls when they were in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, and that change did not take place until they were in 7th grade. And just kind of anecdotally, it made a huge difference because especially at that time period, when you're going through all the hormonal changes and all these adolescent pubertal changes, for the girls, they were able to be more active without the interference of boys and the boys hogging, but I do agree with what Diane said in terms of that separate and equal wasn't present. That I think same gender PE classes is a good idea for especially those girls who were probably participants in the new moves, girls who aren't very active or who aren't very comfortable moving, but making sure that they have those kind of equal opportunities that boys get.
Great. Well, let's wrap it up, and we can give these guys, these three fantastic U of M researchers, some of the top in the field, another round of applause.